All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Avoid Common Family History Pitfalls and Myths. My name is Kathleen McKenzie, Education and Programming Manager here at American Ancestors, and I will be the moderator for today's session. This program is brought to you by the Brew Family Learning Center. American Ancestors is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history, and we are pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. Our presenter today is Senior Genealogist Rhonda R. McClure. Rhonda is a nationally recognized professional genealogist and lecturer. Before joining American Ancestors in 2006, she ran her own genealogical business for 18 years. She was a contributing editor for Heritage Quest magazine, Biography magazine, and was a contributor to the History Channel magazine and American History magazine. In addition to numerous articles, she is also the author of 12 books, including the award-winning Complete Idiot's Guide to Online Genealogy, Finding Your Famous and Infamous Ancestors, and Digitizing Your Family History. She is also the editor of the currently available 6th edition of the Genealogist Handbook for New England Research. Her areas of expertise include immigration and naturalization, late 19th and early 20th century urban research, State Department federal records, New England, the Midwest, Southern, German, French, Italian, Scottish, Irish, French Canadian, and Atlantic Canadian research. So, when we first begin family history research or start work on a new line, we tend to be eager and excited. But that enthusiasm can cloud our thinking and fuel endless, unproductive searching. Today, Rhonda will share her top tips for avoiding common hazards in your research process. She'll walk you through some of these common mistakes and will discuss her tips for staying organized, analyzing your research, and more. At any point during the presentation, please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A panel found at the bottom of your screen. We'll address as many of those as we can at the end. There is also an optional syllabus available for purchase if you are interested. Your purchase helps support us in making these free webinars. This presentation is also being recorded for later viewing on our website and YouTube channel. So if you missed something on today's first listen, don't worry, you can always review the presentation later. All right, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rhonda.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I look forward to sharing some information about pitfalls that we may create and how to maybe go around them. So we are going to look at certain pitfalls that have come down through history as being the ones that we ourselves have created. One of the most important ones is hanging on to family legends. Not everyone was with Washington at Valley Forge. We're also going to discuss things like overlooking the obvious, placing 20th and 21st century meanings on old records and old terminology, making assumptions, what I call leapfrog researching, getting tripped up by spelling, and not verifying your sources. We're going to start off with family legends and myths. As with anything you do in your genealogical research, you want to treat your family legends and myths as though you were an investigative reporter. Look at them with the cold eye of an investigative reporter. They often will contain a grain of truth. The problem is trying to figure out just what that grain of truth is. Some of the more common family legends / myths are, my surname was always spelled this way. Someplace in Europe is named for your ancestor. You're related to someone rich or famous of the same surname. Your name was changed at Ellis Island. There's a Cherokee princess in your tree. Or 3, fill in your surname here, brothers settled in 3 different locations in America. We're going to start out with spelling of names. So we think in terms of, everybody spells a name a certain way. Spelling was really never rigid until the late 19th century. And in fact, there is a legal term that addresses variant spellings. Item sonans, it basically assumes a person's identity is known even if their name is misspelled, as long as the misspelled name sounds the same when pronounced. And phonetics do play a part in how people would write in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. Another big one is which came first, kind of like the chicken and the egg. Well, which came first, the place or the surname? Keep in mind that surnames have existed primarily since the 1200s. Prior to that, people basically had a first name. They may have been of some place or something. Town names usually existed well prior to the creation of surnames. And so it's not uncommon for your surname to have been taken from the town rather than the other way around. Famous or infamous kin, you may be related, but you do need to keep an open mind. Research not only your own lineage, which you would be doing, but it also becomes important to research the lineage of the person you think you are related to. And one that I hear all too often because of my own obsession with immigration, the name was changed at Ellis Island. Passenger manifests were filled out in the old country. And so the whole, there's great stories of, oh, he couldn't speak English. And so every time a question was asked, he just smiled and his name became Smiley. No, that's not how it worked. In the time frame when most people were coming into Ellis Island, which of course did not open until 1892, by this point, it's kind of a well-oiled machine. And as we get into the 1900s, each passenger would have worn the identification card that you see here on the right. It would have included the name of the individual, the manifest sheet number, which was the passenger page number, and then what was known as the list number or the line number. So here we have Dominica Ragusa. She is on manifest sheet 204, list number 2. And sure enough, there she is in all her glory on the passenger list. So the passengers would be wearing these cards on their coat, their shirt, whatever. And as they entered into Ellis Island or the other immigrant stations, the inspector would see that card and would go to that passenger page. And basically, he would ask the questions again because there's no photographs of our individuals. So he is comparing the answers to the answers that were originally given. Also, keep in mind that they had interpreters who spoke, upwards of 60 plus languages in especially Ellis Island, but in the other immigrant stations as well. The Cherokee princess. I'm not quite sure why it's always the Cherokees who get the princess, but I've not heard of any other of the tribal names being associated with a princess. However, Cherokees had no royalty. The word princess was a European term that was applied to the daughters of the chiefs. And a lot of times people will say, oh yes, I have a Cherokee princess in my history. One of the things that you may want to do is to check out this little book. It is an older book that was published some time ago, but it's one of my go-tos. It was by Myra Vanderpool Gormley, and she gives you a lot of useful information in this volume. The Three Brothers legend has been around for probably as long as people have been researching their ancestry. The legend absolutely might be true, but it is very unlikely. What happened was individuals who were researching may have discovered people of the same surname, one who went to New England, one who perhaps went to Virginia, and maybe one who went to Georgia. And all of a sudden, they're all related, they're brothers, they came on the same ship. This is generally not the case. These are often assumptions that were made by earlier researchers. And keep in mind that most of your ships would not have gone to those 3 ports. So everybody got off at some place. And then to assume that they are all related is actually going to lead you astray. It is much better to focus on your individual to see what you can learn. Also, if there is a published volume that mentions, the people who are coming in on a ship, such as Houghton's Persons of Quality, etc., then you may want to compare and see who else of that same surname arrived on the ship as well. One of our bigger issues, I think, in present day, though, is applying modern meanings to old terms. This is one of the, it kind of can go in hand with assumptions. The title of mistress, which is abbreviated as Mrs., we usually assume that when we see Mrs., that it is a married individual. However, it was technically the abbreviation for the word mistress. So if you were the mistress of the house, and could have applied to older unmarried women. So just keep that in mind. The term nephew, believe it or not, could also mean grandson. A great resource for old terms is Ancestry's Concise Genealogical Dictionary. It was compiled by Maureen and Glenn Harris. And you can see here I have highlighted nephew, and it says, in addition to the common usage, it could also mean an illegitimate son of an ecclesiastic, a niece, or a male or female grandchild. Here's another example of an old term that is being applied from a modern standpoint. And in this instance, we have a individual named John Bowles, and he was listed as the father-in-law of the said minor, in this case, Albert W. Hastings. As a result, a lot of individuals assumed that Albert's mother was originally named Margaret Bowles. In fact, she was Margaret Parsons, who married John Bowles after her first husband, Ezra Hastings, died. So this caused all sorts of interesting wrong avenues of research until it was actually figured out. All right, let's talk a little bit about assumptions. You need to understand the record that you are using. Why is someone on a census when they die? Why aren't they on that census if they were born? It's important to always understand the background of the record and to keep in mind, in this case, what instructions was the enumerator given when he was going door to door. There's a great PDF file measuring America, the decennial censuses from 1790 to 2000 that is available through the US Census Bureau as a PDF. And they have the actual instructions that were given to the enumerators. We're going to zoom up here under heading 3, entitled The Name of Every Person Whose Usual Place of Abode on the First Day of June. So this is for the 1850 census. And it kind of split over 2 pages. The second page talks about who should be listed. The name of any member of a family who may have died since the first day of June is to be entered and described as if living. Meanwhile, the name of any person born since the first day of June is to be omitted. And so because the first day of June was the official date of the census, that's why sometimes you may actually get individuals who were dead showing up as still living. Also, don't assume when it comes to understanding certain things about like land ownership, majority age, etc. It's very important that you seek out the laws. It's not uncommon for us to assume that ancestors under 21 could not own land. This is actually incorrect. They could own through inheritance or through a gift. If they were under 21, what they couldn't do is they could not sell their property. This would have been handled through a guardian. So somebody would have been appointed to that individual, especially if they inherited the land through perhaps, their father died and they're inheriting land. then a guardian would have been appointed to handle that individual, that child's situation until they reached the age of 21 if they were a boy. And there is a great list of, on Bob's genealogy filing cabinet, of legal age, showing things, actions only adults could perform, as well as actions that minors could perform. And you can get there at the URL that you see on our screenshot. Another great resource is commentaries on the laws of England. Keep in mind that because the original colonies were founded by people coming out of the United Kingdom, that we were bringing with us those laws that we knew in England. And so Blackstone's book here, you can get it as a Kindle, gives you a lot of good information about what individuals could and couldn't do as a minor. All right, Leapfrog research. This is one of the things that even I am guilty of doing from time to time. Here's a scenario. The 1880 census of California says that your second great grandfather was 48 years old. That would make him born circa 1832, and that he was born in Ohio. We automatically jump to the 1840, or more aptly, the 1850 census in Ohio, looking for our second great grandfather. Of course, there's a lot of things that can happen, a lot of events, a lot of information, a lot of records that could be generated between 1832 and 1880. As a result, we want to consider building and filling in a timeline of the life of that individual. Here is an example of a timeline that I have created for some research that I'm actively doing, and I am looking for individuals of the Geoffrion surname in Quebec, and I have color-coded this. So the beginning of this particular timeline starts with the founding and identifying of the area that would become Nouvelle-France, ultimately Quebec. And then I have color-coded anything pertaining to the Geoffrion family as pink. I am interested in the epidemics because he has a couple of children who just sort of up and disappear. I think they may have died as children. And then he has a couple of sons who were involved in fur trading. So I am very aware of certain fur trading trends, and it allows me to interject all of these items. And here you can see the timeline where I am fitting in things. So at the very, very top, you can see green. New France could trade for furs with indigenous people, but had to sell the beaver and moose hides to the company at fixed prices. I'm also, you'll notice, very big on citing where I'm getting my information from. So some things are coming from, A People's History of Quebec. Some things are coming from the Canadian Encyclopedia. I have all sorts of different books that I have acquired on this. And then you will see that there is, for the 24th of July, 1665, that it says supposedly mentioned in a justice document of this date. And at the time I was doing my original research on this, it indicated that nobody actually said anything about what this justice document was. And it was only by requesting it from the Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales de Québec that I was able to determine that he was literally requesting to be paid 13 livres for work he had done in 1665, which negated a family myth about him having been a soldier as part of the Carignan-Sallier regiment. And then down below that one, you see that in 1665, there was a typhus epidemic. All right, so we've talked a lot about some of the different types of myths, et cetera, that we might come across. I've also said, it's a really good idea to start a timeline on your person, especially if you're having difficulty placing him in certain areas. But we also have to be methodical. That means using things like research logs to detail what we've already done and to-do lists to point us to things that we need to do in the future. I also recommend using source checklists to identify possible records. After all, if you don't know that a record exists, it's not possible for you to look for it. And then study the locality, the occupation, the period to get a better sense of what's going on that could have affected your ancestor. Here's a research log. I have created this little table in Word. It's really simple to do. You just say, I want this many columns, etc. This is actually based on the printed, now PDF version of the research log that is created by the Family Search Library, in large part because when I started doing genealogy way back in the dark ages, when my grandchildren are convinced the dinosaurs roamed the earth, these were printed pages that I could get when I was visiting the library in Salt Lake City. And as a result, I just got familiar with them. And so I created my own version of that in Word, in large part because I type faster and I can be more thorough, especially in my comments and purpose of my search. To-do lists, task lists, they may also call them research logs. Almost all genealogical software programs offer some form of a version of this for you to be able to keep track of things that you need to do as you're moving forward. And the best time to be creating those is when you are working on a family, especially if you're sitting at home and you're using, online images and things, and then there's something that you've got to, oh, I need to write away for this, or I need to reach out for this, or the next time I go to my family history or my family search center or my family search library affiliate, I need to look at these images that aren't available from home. That's the time to create those items within your genealogy software. Another great program is GenSmarts. This actually will help you in identifying records that exist. Here's a screenshot from GenSmarts. I will say that this is only available for Windows users, but what it does is you can import a GEDCOM of your family history from whatever genealogy program you use, and then it will compare that with known records. And the reason that we know these records exist is because the person who created GenSmarts literally used the catalog of Family Search to create what it's comparing to. And so here you can see that for Benjamin Standifer, it's suggesting that I've highlighted the Nebraska 1870 census, and it says that that would be a good one because he was married in 1867 in Douglas County, Illinois, and then he was married again in 1872 in Vesta, Johnson County, Nebraska. So it's saying, if you haven't found him over here in Illinois, you might want to check the 1870 Nebraska census. So not only does it tell me the record that might give me an answer, but it also supplies a reason why I should check that. There is also, we often need to turn somewhere else for help. There are great how-to books and sites, locality-specific books and sites, also fellow researchers. Many of us, attend genealogical society meetings. Of course, since the pandemic, we now know that in a lot of places they offer hybrids of in-person and online. There are conferences that are in person and online, classes and courses and webinars such as this that are either in person or online, and then often forums or online message areas. A great useful resource for for US research is Ancestry's Red Book, American State, County, and Town Sources. Each state has a little narrative that talks about some of the idiosyncrasies for the particular state in question for different types of records. And then for most of the states, there is a county list showing the name of the county, when it was formed, some of the records. Here you're seeing a additional chart for the New England states because a lot of them had things that were filed on a town level. And so all the New England states also have these town charts as well. Some other resources, locality specific. New England Genealogical Research, A Guide to Sources by Kip Sperry. I still go to this one even though it's dated and maybe the film numbers aren't right anymore, but it gives me guidance. Connecticut Researcher's Handbook is one of my go-tos for Connecticut research because it is, Connecticut's got a lot of things that are very, very different. And then the Genealogical Research in New England is another example. Even though books have been published, say, pre-internet, does not mean that they are not valuable in our research. And of course, if you are doing research in New England, we do now have the 6th edition of the Genealogist Handbook for New England Research, in which we have, again, a narrative style selection that is also then followed by a list of towns. There are maps showing for the counties, showing where the towns are located, when certain records were created, and out of which town or county those places came from. And here you have a peek into my Kindle. I may or may not be a little crazy with Kindle. I currently have 604 volumes that I have acquired in one form or another. Also, I have some additional digital items in the Apple Books app, Barnes & Noble Nook, Kobo Books, Google Play, and Bluefire Reader. If I get a book electronically, that is usually how I will get it now, in large part because when we go on tours and I'm trying to help people, I have all these books right at my fingertips that I can easily call up. I can do searches in. And so you can see some of the things that I have been focusing on over the last year or so. And I still order real books when that's the only way to get them. And this is often for very specialty books or books that were published, say, in the late 1990s, largely before everything was starting to become either a book or a Kindle or an electronic book. And so you can see here that especially some of my foreign language books, I can only get in a book format. 3 of these volumes were acquired not only for the information in them, but also for the source citations. That was Histoire de Coureur de Bois, Making the Voyager World, and The French in North America. Again, sometimes knowing what sources they used allows me then to lead to a source I didn't know existed. So that is a resource that I want to avail myself of. And then the Dictionnaire de droit québécois et canadien is a legal dictionary. I now find this to be very useful when I'm working in notarial records, which is basically Quebec's answer to court records. Also, community outreach, as I mentioned, there are any number of ways that you can reach out to individuals. This is from long, long ago, back before we had pretty pictures on the internet. We were just starting to do things with online services. And this was from a bulletin board in which I had sent out a message to the RootsWeb McLean mailing list asking for information about this particular family. And this was how we would communicate. There was nothing pretty about it, but it did give us valuable information. All right, let's turn our attention to the internet, which is where most of us are now living. And it's important that we question, evaluate, analyze, and verify what we are finding online. This is a very old sample page that I put up, and it has source citations. And as you can see, one of the things that I did this as a test because people were saying, oh, if I give my source citations, everybody just takes my information and never contacts me and never shares. In actuality, what I discovered was more people reached out to me directly because of this, because I had included sources, than they did on a similar family that was related to the Moons, where I chose not to put the sources. So If you're creating any web pages and you have source citations, which I hope you do, it's always good to include those in the page that you create. And on Ancestry, we often find now that they have suggested records. These are, but it's sort of a double-edged sword because some of them could actually give you clues to where somebody ended up, especially if they don't seem to stay put. But also sometimes they are not your person, especially if the name is similar or a common name. So you want to keep that in mind. So here we have David Miller, who actually, while it was spelled Miller, in the census, it actually was David Millen, who was residing in Littleton, Grafton County, New Hampshire in the 1810 census. Based on that, we had the suggested records, one of which was the 1880 US Census for a David Miller/Millen, who was born in 1806 in New Hampshire and was still living in Littleton, Grafton, New Hampshire, giving us additional information. This plays into our continuing leapfrogging of research in large part because it's like, hey, here he was in 1810, here he is again in 1880. And so we immediately jump to that and we skip all the years in between and the valuable information that we could be tracking on a person. One of the things that I did is because I was looking for Millens in Littleton, Grafton County, New Hampshire, was I started to look at the tax lists. And I used a program called Clues. I use this whenever I have a brick wall that I am trying to solve because it allows me to link individuals through records rather than trying to create families out of that. And you can see here that I tracked David Millen from 1806 up to 1825. That was as far as those particular tax lists went that were available to me through Family Search, but I was able to trace him for each year and to understand, that he was definitely still there up through at least 1825. And one of the things about David was that since he was in the 1806 and the 1810 census, the gentleman born in 1806 who was residing in Littleton in 1880 could not have been this same man who showed up in 1810, more than likely a son. Now, one of the other things that we can do is we can go on Family Search through the catalog, which is a way that I really recommend using Family Search to get the most out of their resources. And here you can see that I was looking at the Littleton Town records. That is where I got my tax list from. You can see the little camera says that I can access these from home. In the catalog, there are 4 icons that you will likely see, provided that you are logged in to Family Search. One is a little magnifying glass. This indicates that some part of those records are indexed and searchable, as in just type in a name and poof, there they are. There's also the camera that says that the images are available from home. There is the camera with a little key over it that indicates some kind of limited availability, more often than not saying that you either need to go to a Family Search Center located in a building of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or a Family Search library affiliate, such as a public library. Our building in Boston serves as an affiliate as well. And then there are a smattering of items that will show this little microfilm reel, and that indicates that those records are still only available to access on microfilm and require that you go to the main Family Search library in Salt Lake City to view them. Here we have the access to the records, the Littleton Town records that I showed you. And a lot of people won't do this if they're not searchable by name. because they see, oh, there's 714 images here. I'm not going to look through all of them. You may not need to. As you're viewing the little small thumbnails, you will start to see things that look different. You can see the first 5 there all are very different from the actual pages of the document in this example. Going further into these records, just sort of scrolling down, you can see that those in the green look like they are very narrative style writing in them. And so if I'm looking for tax lists, what I'm looking for, what I've highlighted here with the red line, the red rectangle, where you can see that there are columnar formatting to those pages. So I could, in essence, just look for those types of images to see if this is indeed the next year's tax lists. And this is what the 1805 taxes look like for Littletown. And you can see the reason that it looks like columnar is because there are these lines that have been drawn. This would have been the poll taxes. So you have all sorts of information here, how many oxen, how many cows, etc., that are in all these lines. And then they've also given you information about the acreage and value of the land. So the tax list showed that David Miller / Millen in 1810. I actually find that he dies in 1825. His widow Melinda appeared after that. The David Miller / Millen that we saw in 1880 was born in 1806. Further research did verify that that turned out to be the son of the David Millen who was found in the 1810 census. Keep in mind, if you take nothing else away from today's lecture, suggested does not always mean right when it comes to the records that are being listed on Ancestry. Another tip is to verify catalog entries. Online catalogs are intended, of course, to assist in finding records. Usually they are accurate in what is available. However, as I have gone through a lot of different iterations, I always examine the entries and compare with the actual records on the film or the images themselves, rather than automatically discounting something. Returning to Littleton, I have this entry here, New Hampshire Town Records with marriages, births, and deaths, 1787 to 1916. That I found through the Family Search catalog. It was one of those few items that, yes, I still had to view it in Salt Lake City and go through the microfilm itself. And you will notice that there are a lot of different items. So under the film column, you can see where there's a film number, and then it says item 1, item 2, item 3, and so on. So all of those items are on the same microfilm, and then the notes are indicating just what it is that I am looking at, or supposedly looking at. However, as I began to work through these records, I started to keep a list of exactly what I was finding. And you'll see that for the second set, the marriage, births, and deaths, 1850 to 1860, and it says note not in chronological order. As I began to go through those records, originally I was just going to skip them because the information I needed is predominantly from like 1804 to 1830. And I was going to skip this, but I decided, since I was sitting at the microfilm, scanner, that I was going to go through these and look. And sure enough, it's a good thing I did, because what I discovered was that it had a lot of early 1700 vital records in that book as well. And verify your sources. Trust nothing, trust no one. 3 sources of inaccurate evidence do not make one correct ancestor. Suggested records through online sites may not be for your ancestor. Here is an article that was published on Pierre Geoffrion who lived from at least 1644 to 1704. That we definitely know he died in 1704. It was published in Memoires de la Société Généalogique Canadienne-Française in 1968. Everybody cites this particular sketch on Pierre and then does not go further. They just take this as that's all there is. One of the items is that I have highlighted with the little red box is that he had a judicial document in 1665. I mentioned this earlier in our timeline, and I have pointed out that it cited a journal down below. Also, there is reference to the 1667 census. It mentions that he was 33 years old and he was a domestic in the house of Jean Aubuchon in Montreal. That is only one entry of a Pierre Geoffrion in the 1667 census. Also, the journal that was cited turns out not to be right, as we will see in the next slide. Here is the BRH volume 33, and it was published in 1927. It turned out that the entry for Pierre Geoffrion was not on page 38 as it was listed in the article by Raymond, but instead on page 538. So you can see here this Les Premiers Colons de Montréal. This was like early settlers of Montreal, of which Pierre Geoffrion does show up. And it mentions in this case, the second line talks about the 1667 census and says specifically that he is mentioned 2 times. Once under the Geoffroy name, which is the one where he is the domestic, and then once by himself, living alone as Geoffrion, the more traditional spelling. So always look at the sources and see what, I was like, where is it? It's not here. And then we had to play around and ultimately find this. And here you can see the 2 individuals, the original that was cited and mentioned in the sketch about Pierre, where he is living in the household of Jean Aubuchon. He's listed as 33 years of age. And then we have the 1667, where second one, where he is living by himself and he's listed as 30. The 33-year-old is probably him serving as a servant earlier in the year 1667, and by the time he is re-enumerated, he has now served out his engagement, his contract, and he's now living alone. And so he probably is the one supplying his age where he's living alone, thus perhaps a more accurate age. The more I researched Pierre Geoffrion, the more I discovered that pretty much I was going to have to go to the originals on everything. Here is a book that we have in our research center in Boston, and it was a lot having to do with civilization and a lot of court records and things in the 17th and 18th centuries for Montreal. And I did find that, lo and behold, Pierre Geoffrion was mentioned, and I, by this point, didn't trust anything that I found, but I was like, oh, I'm going to get this record. Down in the footnote, it told me that it was part of their court records of Montreal. It gave me the date and everything. So the derivative record, this abstract, if you don't speak French, Google Translate will give you a decent enough version of the transcription. And so that is basically, what you see here. I just typed it all in. I do love the fact that the pigs did not respect the harvests. And so apparently in the fall of 1667, Urbain Baudereau slaughtered 2 or 3 of them in his fields. The owner of these animals, Pierre Geoffrion, appealed in vain to the bailiwick of the place to obtain reimbursement on October 2nd. So I wrote away to the bibliothèque in Montreal, and I said, hey, I need this record. I got back this original, record, and here we have the transcription of that entry. And what I discovered is that no, it wasn't Urbain who killed the pigs, it was his pigs, and that Pierre Geoffrion was the person who killed the pigs. So again, this is showing you trust, don't trust. One of the reasons that I was obsessed with this particular record was we were trying to figure out when Pierre Geoffrion had served out his contract to come over to Nouvelle-France. And so if he had pigs and or they were on his land, that was important because he could not have owned land if he's still serving out a kind of like a servant contract. Also, it's really, really important that we read the records. You need to take time. Don't just look for the information you expect to find. Also, please don't assume you already know what the record is going to tell you. If you assume that, you're going to skim it and you're going to say, oh yeah, there it is. It says just what I thought it would. Spend time reading the entire document. Also consider making notes. Here is one of the 197 pages of the Civil War pension for my ancestor, Benjamin Standifer. And at the time I was looking at this, I skipped over this document because it was all handwritten, and I looked at all the forms because the forms were going to tell me everything I needed to know about Benjamin Standifer. In fact, this document literally gave me a timeline of where he had been preceding his enlistment right up until he was applying for his Civil War pension. It continues to go telling us that he started out in Illinois, and then he ends up in Iowa County, Iowa. In the fall of 1881, he moved from Homestead to Audubon, Audubon County, Iowa. Then in November of 82, he moved from Audubon to, I can't even read that one, Ottawa in Monona County. It is literally telling me by line where he was residing as the years go forward. Here's another document in my, when I was a baby genealogist, I was told get land records. I got land records. I filed land records. I put them all in, folders for my families. I had no idea what it was telling me. And it wasn't until I was using clues trying to determine who Benjamin Standifer's father was that I literally was forced to read this document, this typed document from, I think it's like 1856, showing the undivided sixth part of the land in question. A typed volume in the mid 1800s. This is probably and was a recreated deed book. It wasn't giving me everything that all the other books gave. So I eventually said, oh, wait, undivided interest. Maybe there's other parts of land. And I returned to the indexes, the grantor indexes, to find other individuals who may have had a land description that showed an undivided 1/6 part. And ultimately, I was able to find 2 or 3 other entries that gave me a similar type of information. Each one slightly different, some undivided, some part, but always with the same rectangular survey description. In looking at one of the volumes, Henry Standifer's Volume K, page 255 of the Moultrie County Deeds, he listed himself as the son of Archibald Standifer, but it also mentioned Archibald's widow, who by 16 December 1858 had remarried someone with the surname Goldsby and was herself now deceased. A gold mine in that land record. When it was all said and done, I had identified, so I had Benjamin, I had Henry, I had Job. I started looking for the other deeds. And so I've been doing the grantor, thinking everybody would have the Standifer name and some variation of the spelling of that name. You'll see that, yeah, two of them were spelled one way, Job was spelled a different way. But then I was like, well, what about the others? Well, Benjamin and Job had sold to Jacob Sees, Henry had sold to Edward H. Sees. So instead, I turned my attention to the grantee index for the Sees surname. I indeed found Job and Benjamin, but then I also found a Jacob and Temperance Moon and a Caleb and Mary Ann Van Meter, who also had similar land descriptions. So I was able to identify two more of the items, and it gave me the married names for two of the females. And once again, I went back to the grantee index again, and I looked specifically for just the description without maybe the undivided interest, but looked for the rectangular survey description and in the same 2414-6 for the township. And I was able to find the last piece, which was this Elisha and Elizabeth Campbell. So I was, from all the deeds, I was able to prove that Benjamin was a son of Archibald because I was able to identify all of his 5 siblings. I learned that his mother was Sarah, and I identified the married names of the 3 sisters that I didn't even know he had. Of course, sometimes we have to go over or around our brick walls. We've talked about pitfalls that we create ourselves. Some pitfalls are simply caused by things out of our control. Courthouse fires, natural disasters, records just simply not having been kept during that time, records that have been lost, or records having been destroyed, sadly on purpose. So you got to form a research strategy. List known facts and traditions about the family. Where might you find more information? What kind of repositories, specific record types? Also, you want to consider the cluster or fan genealogy approaches. Cluster and fan. Cluster I tend to use when I'm looking for a surname in a larger area, like say a county or a state. Fan looks at things like your neighbors, the associates, and things like that. And so you want to ask yourself, who were your ancestors' neighbors? Who signed the deeds as witnesses? Who served with your ancestor in military? Who vouched for him on naturalization papers? And who became godparents for baptisms of his children? Don't limit yourself to just genealogy records. Remember, there is no such thing as a genealogy record. All the records that we as genealogists use were created for completely different reasons, and we have just enveloped them and have decided to go forward with them. Be curious. Expand to a variety of records, no matter how implausible they may seem. Keep an open mind. Get out of the genealogy department of your library and go beyond genealogy websites. I am a big proponent of using things like theses and dissertations, not for the subject matter per se. This happens to be people who were servants in the colony of Laurentian, and you know, the early time frame where those who were coming into Nouvelle-France were coming over on these engagements, these contracts. What I wanted was the bibliography that was used by the person who created this particular thesis. Because if I can learn records that are manuscript type things that are found in archives, this is a way for me to reach out to find out and learn about new resources that perhaps I didn't know existed, and to, historians attack things differently from genealogists. So I look at what the historian is using, and then I see, is this something that I can use for myself as a genealogist? So in review, don't hold tight to those family legends. Yes, keep them in the back of your head, but keep in mind that as time has gone on, those have probably changed. Assumptions and old terms can lead you astray. You want to be methodical. Look beyond your basic records. And as you saw, verify your sources. Read the records. And yes, think outside the box. Be creative as to what other records might exist out there that could point you somewhere.
All right. Thank you so much, Rhonda, for that great overview today. So many great tips in there. So we'll be getting to the questions that have been getting submitted through the Q&A panel. But first, I just wanted to quickly run through some upcoming events that we have. So first up here is an online course that we're offering on Wednesdays in January on getting started in family history research. Rhonda will be one of the presenters for this, along with David Allen Lambert and Melanie McComb. So that will be a great one. And then we have an online lecture, another free webinar happening on January 14th on choosing a DNA test for your research goals. This will be presented by Melanie McComb. And then finally here we have an online research workshop, which is a little bit different. This is a 3-day program on preserving your family history research documents, bound volumes, and photographs. This will be a little bit more interactive. It will include consultations with our conservator and our archivists, and it will be focused on their tips for preserving your personal collection of documents. You can learn more about these and all of our upcoming events at americanancestors.org/events. All right, so now we will go ahead and turn to your questions. So first up, Rhonda, I wanted to ask, we had several questions when you mentioned accessing records at the Family Search Library in Salt Lake City. And several folks were wondering if you can still request microfilm at local family search centers, if, certain records are only available in Salt Lake City. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So unfortunately, the cost of duplicating microfilm became so exorbitant that the Family Search Library in Salt Lake City no longer will duplicate microfilm to send to a local family search center. One of the reasons that I think that kind of spurred their impetus to digitize so many of their records was because they were not going to be able to allow that surface anymore. So if you see in the catalog that something is only available on microfilm, then you are either going to have to hire somebody out there, or, hey, go out to Salt Lake City. The library is fabulous. You could even come with us in November. We go every November and we have a great time.
Yes, we definitely do. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that if anyone would like to email me. All right, so next up here, do you use software or have any recommendations for organizing citations?
So I cite my sources within my genealogical software. And I'm a Mac girl, so my personal information is all stored in Reunion. However, for things that I do for the society, I usually use a Windows machine for that. And on that, I use RootsMagic. RootsMagic has an extensive template collection of source citations. And so if you can fill in the blanks, you've got a great source citation right there. And I make a point of, as I'm adding in information, I am citing the source right then and there, so that I don't come back later and realize that I've got 40 people I have to cite. It's better if you do it right as you're going.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then we had a question about kind of how you handle coming across unverified connections, maybe in an ancestry tree or on Family Search. Do you take notes on these unverified connections to kind of look into later? Do you have any recommendations for managing these as you come across them?
So it kind of stems from the trust nothing, trust no one. If there's no source citation for me to evaluate, but I think it's possible that what they have is something that I might be interested in, then yes, I may make a note to my person that, so, such and such a tree, and I probably will copy and paste the URL for that into the note and saying, yes, on this tree, it suggests that his parents are this, or he has this third wife, or whatever it is. And, but I will not put that person or those parents in to my database until I can verify it. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And then we also got a few questions about the Ancestry Red Book that you referenced. Some folks were wondering where that can be purchased, and somebody else found a third edition from 2004, and they were wondering if you know if that's the latest edition available.
So yes, the third edition, that is the one that I did show on the screen. It is the most recent. You might be able to find a used copy of it through Amazon or some of the other booksellers. I wish I could remember where I found my online version. The charts are not outstanding. They're still readable. They're a little blurry, but they're still readable. And I got it. I want to say it's in my Kindle, so I must have gotten it off of Amazon, perhaps, in their Kindle collection. So that's the one that I'm using that I carry with me.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And since you mentioned Kindle there, we did get a couple of questions about Kindle. Can you read the books on a computer instead of a Kindle reader? And are you kind of charged per book, or is it more of a subscription model?
So there's a couple of different ways you can do things. I read everything on my iPad predominantly or my iPhone. Both have the Kindle app on them. And there is also an app that you can load to your computer as well, so you can read them on there. There are some books that if you have there's something called Kindle Unlimited. It is a subscription service, but they have a lot of great books that you can download and just read and maybe not save. I think you're allowed 10 unlimiteds, like checked out like a library. So you could use that option. And most of the time, what I also love about the Kindle books is that they tend to be cheaper than the original, like the hardback or the paperback books. And so that, I feel like I'm saving money when I purchase them that way. Don't get me wrong, I still love the feel of books, but this way I can take things with me. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. But as far as I know, there's a Kindle app for, every phone that's out there, every tablet that's out there. You don't just have to have one of the Kindle readers.
All right, great. Thank you. Then a question, are there other meanings for the word cousin? If you see that relationship on a passenger list or something like that, are there any other historic uses of that word other than how we think of it today?
I mean, there could be. Let me see if I can quickly look that up and see if I can. Hang on a second. Let's see. Oh, here it is. Okay, let me get into cousin. I mean, it is one of those where I would not be surprised that we have multiple versions for it. Go cousin. I have to relearn my alphabet apparently.
I'll also just mention somebody just wrote in that she thinks in Old England the word cousin was used kind of freely for all sorts of different types of people. So I'll
Yeah,
mention.
it could be you know, generally we think of it in terms of like a first cousin, like somebody really, really close. It's more of a like kinship kind of thing. It could be, second, third, fourth cousin that we would not necessarily consider a cousin, but because they know them, especially if they're coming from some certain areas where, you know, everybody of that surname lived together and knew each other, then they may say, yeah, I'm going to my cousin who is a very distant cousin. But it's not like a son or a niece or things like that in the more traditional format. It could just be a wider relationship than we're used to using.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then a question I know we get a lot. When you find errors in other trees, do you reach out to that tree owner? How do you typically handle that?
I tend not to, in large part because depending on the individual in question, um, sometimes they don't even realize that person's in their database. They may have absorbed somebody else's GEDCOM and it's in and on their tree. Some people just ignore you. So if they're, especially if there's not source citations, my general rule of thumb is if they don't have source citations that I can evaluate, I'm not going to take that information anyway. I'm looking to see the sources and to be able to evaluate the conclusions that were drawn. You could try, but a lot of times you're either going to get ignored. They may say, I don't know what you're talking about, or they may just say, no, you're wrong. So we've only got X amount of time that we can do this. I feel like it's just better that I just focus on what I'm doing.
Great, thank you. And I see we're over time here. I'll just squeeze in one question because I know you're our resident Mac expert, Rhonda. And someone was wondering if you have any recommendations for good Mac genealogy programs.
So my personal favorite is Reunion. In large part because it was always a Mac program. A lot of the other ones have been ported over. However, it also depends on if you've got your information on Ancestry. If you do and you want to sync it with your Ancestry, then Family Tree Maker is going to be your go-to because that one was designed to sync. There is now a Roots Magic Mac version so that will also do supposed to be able to sync between family ancestry and or family search. So those would be my top three.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much again, Rhonda, for that great lecture today. A lot of great information shared there. Unfortunately, this is all that we have time for today. But if you do have more specific questions about your family history research, you might consider hiring our research services team or using our chat service, which I highly recommend. The chat service puts you in direct communication with one of our genealogists, and it's totally free and open to the public Monday through Saturday from 9 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And to access this service, you just go to americanancestors.org/chat. We had a lot of great questions coming in today, so this would be a good place to take those questions too if we didn't get to yours this afternoon. You can also book a one-on-one consultation with our experts at the link shown on the screen or through the QR code displayed there as well. I'll also point out that Rhonda is one of our genealogists who gives a lot of these consultations, so you can even book one with her if you'd like to do that. So thank you again for joining us today. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. This free webinar was made possible by the generous support of our members and friends around the world. Please consider making a gift to American Ancestors to help keep these programs free and to create more free programs as well. I hope to see you at our online programs again in the future, and goodbye for now.